For decades, riders have argued over which engines are the most reliable. But what if the one that actually solved the problem was quietly abandoned? By the late 1970s, BMW was losing ground fast, forced to rethink everything they knew about motorcycles. Instead of following the competition, they took a radical turn, borrowing from automotive engineering to create what riders would call the flying brick. In this video, we're breaking down 5 reasons why this engine became one of the most durable ever built, and 3 reasons why, despite all of that, it still disappeared. And without wasting any time, let's get straight into it and start with the reasons why it's so good. Number 5. Borrowed brilliance from the car world. BMW did not stumble into the flying brick by accident. They built it like a machine that had already lived a full life somewhere else, because in many ways it had. At a time when most motorcycles still relied on air cooling and carburetors that constantly needed attention, BMW reached into the automotive world and pulled out systems that had already been tested for years under far harsher conditions. Not on weekend rides, but in traffic, in heat, in cold, day after day. And then they reshaped those ideas into something that could fit inside a motorcycle. The fuel injection system was not experimental. It came from Bosch, refined through thousands of cars before it ever touched a K-series engine. The liquid cooling system was designed to hold steady temperatures, no matter how long you stayed on the throttle. Even the internal layout reflected car thinking, built for longevity first, convenience second, and performance third. That order mattered, and if you're the kind of rider who cares about engines that actually last, not just what the marketing says, hit that like button, drop a hype, and subscribe. Because that's what pushes us to keep breaking down machines that most people completely misunderstand. And because while other bikes chased peak horsepower numbers, BMW quietly built something that almost refused to wear out. Components were not pushed to their limits. They were held back deliberately so they could last longer than anyone expected. And out on the road, that philosophy revealed itself in the most unexpected way. Nothing dramatic happened. No constant tuning, no fragile parts giving up early, no sense that the engine was being stressed. It just kept going. And that is where the story starts to turn. Because when you build a motorcycle using systems that are already proven to survive for hundreds of thousands of miles, you are also creating a machine that does something manufacturers rarely plan for. It stops needing to be replaced. And that leads directly into the next piece of the puzzle. Number 4, the engine that ran the length of the bike. The last piece explained where the flying brick got its durability. This is where you start to feel it, because BMW did not just change what powered the bike, they changed how that power moved through it. Most motorcycles follow the same basic formula. The engine sits sideways in the frame, the crank spins across the bike, and power gets redirected through chains or multiple gears before it ever reaches the rear wheel. It works, but it introduces friction, loss, and a long list of parts that slowly wear down. BMW looked at that and decided to straighten everything out. They turned the engine so the crankshaft ran front to back, perfectly in line with the bike itself. Power no longer had to zigzag its way to the rear wheel. It traveled in a straight path through a single direction change and into a shaft drive that was sealed, protected, and built to last. That one decision removed layers of complexity, fewer moving parts, fewer stress points, less energy wasted before it ever touched the pavement. But the real difference showed up once you were moving. At highway speed, the bike felt planted in a way most riders were not used to. No twitchiness, no constant corrections, just a steady, almost effortless push forward, like the entire machine had settled into its natural position. Even heat was managed differently. With a forward-facing radiator and liquid cooling working in harmony, the engine stayed consistent mile after mile, instead of cycling through hot and cold extremes that slowly wear things out. It did not feel dramatic. It felt controlled. Now I'm curious, have you ever owned or ridden something that borrowed car-level engineering like this? Drop it in the comments, because real-world experience tells us way more than spec sheets ever will. That longitudinal layout solved efficiency and packaging in a way few designs ever have. Yet even that clever configuration is not the real reason these engines refuse to die. The deeper truth reveals itself in the next answer, where BMW did not just design for performance, but deliberately engineered the engine to live an easier life than anything competing against it. Number 3, the engine that refused to struggle. Up to this point, you can see how the flying brick was built differently. This is where you understand why it aged differently. Because deep inside that engine, BMW made a decision that went completely against the direction of the industry at the time. While everyone else was chasing higher red lines and bigger power numbers, BMW chose restraint. Not because they could not build a faster engine, because they did not want to. The inline 4 in the BMW K100 and the triple in the BMW K75 were designed around a longer stroke and a calm, torque-focused delivery. On paper, the output looked modest. Nothing about it would win a bench racing argument, but that misses the point entirely. These engines were not built to impress for a few seconds. They were built to perform the same way every day for years. A longer stroke means the engine does not need to spin as fast to make usable power. Lower piston speeds, less internal friction, reduced load on bearings, rods, and valve components. Everything inside the engine moves with less urgency and far less stress. And over time, that matters more than horsepower ever will. Because engines rarely fail from a single dramatic moment. They wear out gradually from thousands of small strains stacking on top of each other. High heat, high speed, constant pressure. BMW simply reduced all of it. Out on the road, the difference is subtle, but unmistakable. The engine never feels like it is being pushed. There is no harshness, no sense of strain when you roll on the throttle at highway speed. Just a steady, confident pull that feels like it could go on forever. And for many owners, it practically does. You start to see machines crossing well over 100,000 miles, then 200,000, often without the engine ever being opened. Not because they were babied, because they were designed to live that way. And designing the engine to operate under low stress explains why it lasts longer than expected. But even a relaxed engine will eventually wear down if the materials and heat management cannot keep up. That exact vulnerability is what leads us into the next direction, where BMW reinforced the brick with solutions specifically chosen to resist time itself. Number 2, built to handle heat like nothing else. By now it is clear this engine was not built by accident. Every layer had intent behind it, and this one might be the most important of all, because it deals with the one thing that quietly destroys every engine ever made. Heat, not distance, not age. Heat. BMW approached the flying brick with a simple but powerful idea. If you can control temperature, you can control wear. And if you can control wear, you can control how long the engine survives. So instead of following traditional motorcycle design, they leaned heavily into automotive thinking. The engine block and cylinder head were built from aluminum, not just to save weight, but because aluminum pulls heat away faster than older materials ever could. That heat did not linger around critical components. It moved quickly and efficiently away from the areas that mattered most. But that was only the beginning. BMW added a full liquid cooling system, complete with a front-mounted radiator and precise thermostatic control. The goal was not just to cool the engine, but to stabilize it. Keep it within a narrow operating range no matter the conditions, long highway runs, stop-and-go traffic, cold starts, summer heat. The engine stayed consistent, and that consistency changed everything. Because most internal damage does not come from a single failure. It builds slowly, through repeated expansion and contraction. Metal heating up, cooling down, over and over again, until tolerances begin to drift and parts start to fatigue. BMW reduced that cycle dramatically. Cylinder walls were coated with materials designed to resist wear over time. Combustion stayed clean and controlled. Oil held its properties longer because it was not constantly being pushed beyond its limits. The result was an engine that did not just run cooler, it aged slower. While other motorcycles quietly accumulated damage with every ride, the flying brick resisted it mile after mile, year after year, with a kind of mechanical calm that owners learned to trust. Advanced materials and controlled temperatures dramatically slow down wear, but even that does not fully justify how these engines reach mileage figures that sound almost unrealistic. To understand that, we have to move into the next chapter, where BMW's philosophy goes beyond smart engineering and enters something far more extreme, building an engine that was never meant to fail within a normal lifetime. Number 1, built to outlast its own era. All the pieces we have covered lead here, not to a single feature, not to one clever idea, but to a mindset. BMW did not design the flying brick to win spec sheet battles. They built it with margins that most motorcycles never see. Strength where it did not strictly need it. Tolerances that favored longevity over aggression. Components that were asked to do less than they were capable of every single time the engine turned over. It was deliberate. Inside, the crankshaft sat on bearings that felt excessive for the power it produced. The shaft drive removed entire categories of wear that chain-driven bikes simply had to accept. Even the engine itself played a structural role, adding rigidity while reducing the kind of stress concentrations that quietly lead to fatigue over time. Nothing about it was pushed to the edge, and that is why it survived. Owners did not discover this overnight. It revealed itself slowly, over years of riding, as the miles climbed higher than expected, then higher than reasonable, and eventually into territory that sounded almost exaggerated. Engines crossing 100,000 miles without being opened, then 200,000, then far beyond that, still running with the same calm, unbothered character they had from the start. Not because they were lucky, because they were built that way. Because they were built that way. And for a long time, that approach did not just work, it looked almost untouchable. The engine did not chase attention. It did not need constant adjustment. It simply kept going, quietly stacking miles in a way that made other machines feel temporary by comparison. Riders began to trust it in a different way. Not as a high-performance machine, not as something delicate or demanding, but as something consistent, predictable, almost indifferent to time itself. But that kind of engineering focus comes with a consequence, because when every decision is made in favor of longevity, something else has to give. Not immediately, not obviously. And that is exactly what happened. The industry did not stand still. Expectations shifted. Performance targets moved. Regulations tightened. And the same design choices that once made the flying brick feel overbuilt started to make it feel constrained. Now, having seen how its strengths shaped its legacy, you are probably asking yourself, if it was built to last forever, why did it start to falter? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever ridden a bike that felt indestructible? And if this video is giving you fresh insight, hit like, hype, and subscribe so you do not miss the next reveal. Which brings us into the 3 reasons why the flying brick eventually showed its limits. Number 3, limited power expansion. For more than 2 decades, the engine inside the BMW K100 carried a reputation most manufacturers would kill for. It did not wear out, it did not complain, and it did not need much from you besides fuel and time. That kind of durability should have made it untouchable. Instead, it quietly boxed the engine into a corner, because the very thing that made the flying brick legendary, its layout, also set a hard limit on what it could ever become. The moment BMW unveiled that sideways inline-4 in the early 1980s, it was not chasing headlines. It was solving problems. Lower center of gravity, smooth power delivery, long-distance stability, and it delivered all of it with a kind of calm confidence that touring riders immediately trusted. But power, that was never the main objective. And that decision followed the engine for the rest of its life. See, the way this motor sat in the frame changed everything. The crankshaft ran front to back. The cylinders stretched out sideways. The entire drivetrain was built as one long unified system, feeding a shaft drive without wasted motion. Clean, efficient, durable, but not flexible. Because increasing output was not just a matter of squeezing more out of the same package. To make real gains, you had to make the engine physically bigger, longer stroke, wider bore, more space. And that space came at a cost. Wheelbase started to grow. Weight crept upward. Handling began to feel stretched. BMW could refine the experience. They could smooth it out, make it quieter, more composed, more comfortable at speed. But they could not push it into a new performance category without starting over. Meanwhile, companies like Honda and Yamaha were shrinking everything. Their engines sat across the frame, compact and tight, leaving room to chase horsepower without turning the bike into a freight train. That difference did not matter at first. Then it mattered a lot. By the time riders started expecting sport bike acceleration in a machine they could ride all day, the flying brick had already shown its full hand. It could go the distance, it just could not keep climbing. So BMW faced a choice: protect what made it special or leave it behind. They chose to walk away, not because the engine failed, but because it had already given everything it could, and the inability to push the platform beyond its power ceiling already put the flying brick at a disadvantage in a market chasing bigger numbers. But even that limitation was not the breaking point. What truly tightened the noose appears in the next step forward, where the very shape and orientation of the engine began clashing with a new kind of enemy. Modern emissions demands that this design was never built to satisfy. Number 2, emissions and design constraints. This is where the outside world finally closed in, not with competition, not with rider demand, but with rules that do not bend for legacy. When launched, BMW K100 felt like a glimpse into the future. Liquid cooling, electronic fuel injection, tight tolerances borrowed straight from automotive engineering. This was not just advanced for its time, it was ahead of what most riders even expected. It ran clean for the ERA, it ran smooth, and it ran for a very long time. But time has a way of rewriting the definition of clean. By the late 1990s, emission standards across markets like the United States and Europe were not just tightening, they were accelerating. Cold start output, fuel atomization, catalytic efficiency, heat management, every part of the combustion process was now under a microscope. And this is where the flying brick started to feel its age. The problem was not a single component, it was the architecture itself. That sideways engine layout, the same one that gave it balance and serviceability, created a packaging puzzle when it came to modern emissions hardware. Routing exhaust cleanly, managing heat buildup under fairings, placing catalytic converters where they could operate efficiently, none of it fit naturally within the original design. Every solution created a new compromise. More shielding meant more heat retention. Different exhaust routing affected airflow. Additional components added weight to a platform already built for long-distance stability. BMW refined what they could. Updated fuel systems, improved engine management, smoothed out delivery. But they were working around a blueprint drawn in a different era. To truly meet the next wave of standards, they were not looking at an upgrade. They were staring at a complete reinvention. And at that point, the question changed. Not how do we fix it, but why are we still holding on to it? Meanwhile, companies like Honda and Suzuki were already building engines with these requirements in mind from the ground up. Tighter packaging, cleaner burn characteristics, easier integration of modern emission systems without fighting the layout itself. BMW could keep adapting the flying brick, but they chose to step into something built for the road ahead. Not because riders stopped trusting the engine, but because the environment it lived in had fundamentally changed. If this video has opened your eyes to the flying bricks engineering, click like and subscribe. Want more insider insights before anyone else? Become a member and get early access to the newest videos. You will see details that most riders never notice. Struggling to meet evolving emission standards exposed just how difficult it was to adapt this architecture to a changing world. But engineering challenges alone do not end an engine's life. The final pressure builds in the next answer, where the market itself moved on, leaving even a million-mile machine behind in favor of something faster, lighter, and easier to sell. Number 1, market shift and competitive pressure. Here is the part most people get wrong about the flying brick. They think it was pushed out. It was not. It was outpaced. When BMW built the BMW K100, they were not trying to win a horsepower war. They were building something that could cross states, cross countries, and keep doing it year after year without drama. Smooth, planted, dependable. A machine that made sense to a rider who cared about the long haul. And for a while that was enough. But the market does not stand still. It never has. Through the 1990s, something shifted, not overnight, but steadily. Riders started looking for a different kind of experience. Not just distance, but intensity. Not just comfort, but response. The feeling that the bike beneath you was not just capable, but eager. And that is where the gap started to open. Manufacturers like Honda and Kawasaki leaned hard into that shift. They built motorcycles that felt lighter the moment you lifted them off the stand, engines that snapped to attention when you rolled the throttle, chassis that turned quicker, stopped harder, and asked less from the rider in tight situations. They were not necessarily built to last forever. They were built to feel alive right now. The flying brick stayed true to its nature. It carried its weight low. It tracked straight at speed. It delivered power in a calm, measured way that made long days easy. But in a market that was starting to reward sharpness and urgency, that calm started to feel slow, and that weight, once a sign of stability, started to feel like resistance. Buyers began to look at motorcycles differently. They were not just asking how far a machine could go without braking. They were asking how it felt in the first 10 seconds of a ride. And in that moment, the comparison changed. BMW saw where things were heading. They could have tried to reshape the flying brick into something it was never meant to be. Strip weight, chase peak numbers, push it into a fight it was not designed for. But that would have meant losing the very character that made it special. So they did not evolve it. They replaced it. Not because it fell short, but because the world around it moved in a different direction. And that is the twist most people do not expect. The flying brick did not become irrelevant. It became out of sync. And when you step back and look at the full picture, something becomes clear. This was not the end of a bad engine. It was the quiet exit of a machine that had already done exactly what it was built to do, just in a world that no longer valued it the same way. If this video made you rethink what reliability really means, the next video takes it even further. Click the next video on your screen and keep the ride going. Subscribe to stay updated. And for early access before anyone else, consider becoming a member.